outside the company, customers, and partners who not only have different areas of expertise but also have different interests. They bring their own biases and their own interests into the picture, as Compact's CEO did when he urged us to continue with CISC development, but that's okay. A business can succeed only if it serves the interests of outside parties as well. This kind of debate is daunting because it takes a lot of time and a lot of intellectual urges. It also takes a lot of guts. It takes courage to enter into a debate you may lose, in which weaknesses in your knowledge may be exposed and in which you may draw the disapproval of your co-workers for taking an unpopular viewpoint. Nevertheless, this comes with the territory, and when it comes to identifying a strategic inflection point, unfortunately, there are no shortcuts. If you are in senior management, don't feel you're being a wimp for taking the time to solicit the views, convictions, and passions of the experts. No statues will be carved for corporate leaders who charge off on the wrong side of a complex decision. Take your time until the news you hear starts to repeat what you've already heard, and until a conviction builds up in your own gut. If you are in middle management, don't be a wimp. Don't sit on the sidelines waiting for the senior people to make a decision so that later on you can criticize them over a beer. My God, how could they be so dumb? Your time for participating is now. You owe it to the company and you owe it to yourself. Don't justify holding back by saying that you don't know the answers. At times like this, nobody does. Give your most considered opinion and give it clearly and forcefully. Your criterion for involvement should be that you're heard and understood. Clearly, all sides cannot prevail in the debate, but all opinions have value in shaping the right answer. What if you are not in management at all? What if you are a salesperson, a computer architect, or a technologist who manages no one? Should you leave the decisions to others? On the contrary, your first-hand knowledge eminently qualifies you as a know-how manager. As a potentially full-fledged participant in these debates, what you may miss in perspective and breadth you make up in the depth of your hands-on experience. It is important to realize what the purpose of these debates is and what it isn't. Don't think for a moment that at the end of such debates all participants will arrive at a unanimous point of view. That's naive. However, through the process of presenting their own opinions, the participants will refine their own arguments and facts so that they are in much clearer focus. Gradually all parties can cut through the murkiness that surrounds their arguments, clearly understand the issues and each other's point of view. Debates are like the process through which a photographer sharpens the contrast when developing a print. The clearer images that result permit management to make a more informed and more likely correct call. The point is, strategic inflection points are rarely clear. Well-informed and well-intentioned people will look at the same picture and assign dramatically different interpretations to it. So it is extraordinarily important to bring the intellectual power of all relevant parties to this sharpening process. If the prospect of a vigorous debate scares you, it's understandable. Lots of aspects of managing an organization through a strategic inflection point petrify the participants, senior management included. But inaction might lead to a bad result for your business, and that should frighten you more than anything else. Arguing with the data. Contemporary management doctrine suggests that you should approach any debate and argument with data in hand. It's good advice. Altogether too often, people substitute opinions for facts and emotions for analysis. But data are about the past, and strategic inflection points are about the future. By the time the data showed that the Japanese memory producers were becoming a major factor, we were in the midst of a fight for our survival. At the risk of sounding frivolous, you have to know when to hold your data and when to fold them. You have to know when to argue with data. Yet you have to be able to argue with the data when your experience and judgment suggest the emergence of a force that may be too small to show up in the analysis but has the potential to grow so big as to change the rules your business operates by. The point is, when dealing with emerging trends, you may very well have to go against rational extrapolation of data and rely instead on anecdotal observations and your instincts. Fear constructively debating tough issues and getting somewhere is only possible when people can speak their minds without fear of punishment. The quality guru W. Edwards Deming advocated stamping out fear in corporations. I have trouble with the simple-mindedness of this dictum. The most important role of managers is to create an environment in which people are passionately dedicated to winning in the marketplace. Fear plays a major role in creating and maintaining such passion. Fear of competition, fear of bankruptcy, fear of being wrong and fear of losing can all be powerful motivators. How do we cultivate fear of losing in our employees? We can only do that if we feel it ourselves. If we fear that someday, any day, some development somewhere in our environment will change the rules of the game, our associates will sense and share that dread. They will be on the lookout. They will be constantly scanning their radar screens. This may bring a lot of spurious warnings of strategic inflection points that turn out to be false alarms, but it's better to pay attention to these, to analyze them one at a time and make an effort to dispose of them, than to miss the significance of an environmental change that could damage your business forever. It is fear that makes me scan my email at the end of a long day, searching for problems, news of disgruntled customers, potential slippages in the development of a new product, rumors of unhappiness on the part of key employees. It is fear that every evening makes me read the trade press reports on competitors' new developments and leads me to tear out particularly ominous articles to take to work for follow-up the next day. It is fear that gives me the will to listen to Cassandras when all I want to do is cry out, "Enough already, the sky isn't falling," and go home. Simply put, fear can be the opposite of complacency. Complacency often afflicts precisely those who have been the most successful. It is often found in companies that have honed the sort of skills that are perfect for their environment. But when their environment changes, these companies may be the slowest to respond properly. A good dose of fear of losing may help sharpen their survival instincts. That's why in a way I think that we at Intel were fortunate to have gone through the terrible times in 1985 and 1986 that I described in Chapter 5. Most of our managers still remember what it felt like to be on the losing side. Those memories make it easy to conjure up the lingering dread of a decline and generate the passion to stay out of it. It may sound strange, but I'm convinced that the fear of repeating 1985 and 1986 has been an important ingredient in our success. But if you are a middle manager, you face an additional fear, the fear that when you bring bad tidings you will be punished, the fear that your management will not want to hear the bad news from the periphery. Fear that might keep you from voicing your real thoughts is poison. Almost nothing could be more detrimental to the well-being of the company. If you are a senior manager, keep in mind that the key role of Cassandras is to call your attention to strategic inflection points, so under no circumstances should you ever shoot the messenger, nor should you allow any manager who works for you to do so. I can't stress this issue strongly enough. It takes many years of consistent conduct to eliminate fear of punishment as an inhibitor of strategic discussion. It takes only one incident to introduce it. News of this incident will spread through the organization like wildfire and shut everyone up. Once an environment of fear takes over, it will lead to paralysis throughout the organization and cut off the flow of bad news from the periphery. An expert in market research once told me how at her company every layer of management between her and the chief executive watered down her fact-based research. I don't think they want to hear that was the byword with which bad news was eliminated, bit by bit, data point by data point, as her information was advanced along the management chain. Senior management in this company didn't have a chance. Bad news never reached them. This company has gone from greatness to real tough times. Watching them from the outside, it seemed that management didn't have a clue as to what was happening to them. I firmly believe that their tradition of dealing with bad news was an integral part of their decline. I have described how our Asia-Pacific sales manager and a key technologist came to see me with their warnings and or perceptions. Both of them were long-term employees, self-confident and comfortable with Intel's culture. They were results-oriented and familiar with constructive confrontation. They understood how these help us collectively to make better decisions and come to better solutions. They knew how we go about doing things and how we don't rules that you don't find written down anywhere. Both overcame their hesitation and took what might be seen as a risk. One came to tell me a piece of news that he felt was a serious problem. It might have been a valid warning, or he might have thought he was foolish to raise it, but he knew he could mention his misgivings without fear of repercussion. The other could explain his views on risk designs with the unstated premise of, "Hey, Grove, you're out of your depth here, let me teach you a few things." From our inception on, we at Intel have worked very hard to break down the walls between those who possess knowledge power and those who possess organization power. The salesperson who knows his territory, the computer architect, and engineer who are steeped in the latest technology possess knowledge power. The people who marshal or shuffle resources, set budgets, assign staff, and remove them from projects possess organizational power. One is not better than the other in managing strategic change. Both of them need to give their best to guide the corporation to good strategic results. Ideally, each will respect the other for what he or she brings to the party and will not be intimidated by the other's knowledge or position. An environment like this is easy to describe but hard to create and maintain. Dramatic or symbolic moves do nothing. It requires living this culture, promoting constant collaborative exchanges between the holders of knowledge power and the holders of organizational power to create the best solutions in the interest of both. It requires rewarding those who take risks when pursuing their jobs. It requires making adherence to the values by which we operate part of the formal management performance process. And, as a last recourse, it requires parting ways with those who can't find it in themselves to adapt. I think whatever success we have had in maintaining our culture has been instrumental in Intel's success in surviving strategic inflection points. Let chaos reign, resolution comes through experimentation. Only stepping out of the old ruts will bring new insights. With all the rhetoric about how management is about change, the fact is that we managers loathe change, especially when it involves us. Getting through a strategic inflection point involves confusion, uncertainty, and disorder, both on a personal level if you are in management and on a strategic level for the enterprise as a whole. These two levels are more intimately connected than one might think. The touchy-feely issues. How a company handles the process of getting through a strategic inflection point depends predominantly on a very soft, almost touchy-feely issue: how management reacts emotionally to the crisis. This is not so strange. Business people are not just managers, they are also human. They have emotions, and a lot of their emotions are tied up in the identity and well-being of their business. If you are a senior manager, you probably got to where you are because you have devoted a large portion of your life to your trade, to your industry, and to your company. In many instances, your personal identity is inseparable from your life work. So, when your business gets into serious difficulties, in spite of the best attempts of business schools and management training courses to make you a rational analyzer of data, objective analysis will take second seat to personal and emotional reactions almost every time. If you are a middle manager, many of the same considerations apply. But very often your job is also at stake. How your corporation succeeds in working its way through a strategic inflection point may determine what happens to your career. A manager in a business that's undergoing a strategic inflection point is likely to experience a variation of the well-known stages of what individuals go through when dealing with a serious loss. This is not surprising, because the early stages of a strategic inflection point are fraught with loss of your company's preeminence in the industry, of its identity, of a sense of control of your company's destiny, of job security, and, perhaps the most wrenching, the loss of being affiliated with a winner. However, unlike the accepted model of the sequence of emotions associated with grief, i.e., denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and, ultimately, acceptance, in the case of a strategic inflection point, the sequence goes more as follows: denial, escape or diversion, and, finally, acceptance and pertinent action. Denial is prevalent in the early stages of almost every example of a strategic inflection point I can think of. During Intel's memory situation, I remember thinking, if we had just started our development of the 16K memory chip earlier, the Japanese wouldn't have made any headway. Escape, or diversion, refers to the personal actions of the senior manager. When companies are facing major changes in their core business, they seem to plunge into what seem to be totally unrelated acquisitions and mergers. In my view, a lot of these activities are motivated by the need of senior management to occupy themselves respectively with something that clearly and legitimately requires their attention day in and day out, something that they can justify spending their time on and make progress in instead of figuring out how to cope with an impending strategically destructive force. At such times, senior managers often involve themselves in feverish charitable fundraising, a lot of outside board activities or pet projects. Take a look at a representative calendar of the CEO of a major corporation that was in the middle of a strategic inflection point. Does his allocation of time, his most precious resource, reflect the strategic crisis? I don't think so. He is by no means unique. Frankly, as I look back, I have to wonder if it was an accident that I devoted a significant amount of my time in the years preceding our memory episode, years during which the storm clouds were already very evident, to writing a book. And as I write this, I wonder what storm clouds I might be ducking now. I'll probably know in a few years. But let's go back to acquisitions, my favorite example. If I undertake a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, every decision associated with it will require my attention. I will have to work so very hard and very quickly that the acquisition will take on far more importance than anything else that I have to deal with in the ordinary line of my business. So I will have created an infinite sink for my attention. I can justify looking in the mirror every morning and saying, I don't have time to deal with such mundane issues as why we are gradually losing sales at the smaller accounts. I've got a very important midnight meeting with my investment advisors coming up. Under the circumstances, my inattention to daily details is understandable, even respectable. The acquisition has taken on a life of its own that takes me away from something that I don't know how to handle. I wonder to what extent all the acquisitions of movie studios by the major Japanese consumer electronics companies were motivated by the need of senior management to engage in diversions from the far more intractable and mundane problems of a secular slowdown of their core businesses. These stages aren't just the province of bad senior managers. Calendar of the CEO of a major U.S. corporation during a strategic inflection point Monday. 8:309:30 Strategic Planning Conference Update 10:0010:30 Review Plans for Annual Design Award 11:0012:00 Management and Measurement Systems 1:00:15 Review Education Speech 1:302:00 Quality Update 4:004:45 Preparation for Board Meeting 5:25 Depart for East Coast City 6:309:30 Dinner Meeting outside Board of Directors overnight in East Coast City Tuesday. 8:009:00 Breakfast Meeting 9:30 Depart for 2nd East Coast City 11:0011:45 Business Association Education Meeting 12:002:00 Business Association Education Task Force 2:008:30 Business Association Board Meeting overnight in 2nd East Coast City Wednesday. 8:1511:45 Charity Executive Committee 12:151:30 Travel to Company Headquarters 2:005:00 Executive Staff Meeting 6 o'clock Depart for East Coast Factory 6:00 Depart for East Coast Factory overnight in Factory Town Thursday. 3:305:00 Plant Celebration, Night Shift 5:309:15 Second Plant Celebration 9:3010:30 Third Plant Celebration 11:0011:50 Fourth Plant Celebration 12 o'clock Depart for Company Headquarters 2:004:15 Executive Staff Meetings Friday. 8:158:30 Board Meeting Agenda 8:309:00 Third Quarter Outlook 9:0012:00 Executive Staff Meetings 1:155:00 Company Review U.S. Division Good leaders are also subject to the same emotional wriggling. They, however, eventually emerge to the acceptance and action phases. Lesser leaders are not capable of that and they are often removed. Then they are replaced by individuals who are not necessarily more capable but who do not have the emotional investment in the previous strategy. This is a key point. The replacement of corporate heads is far more motivated by the need to bring in someone who is not invested in the past than to get somebody who is a better manager or a better leader in other ways. The inertia of success. Senior managers got to where they are by having been good at what they do. And over time they have learned to lead with their strengths. So it's not surprising that they will keep implementing the same strategic and tactical moves that worked for them during the course of their careers, especially during their championship season. I call this phenomenon the inertia of success. It is extremely dangerous and it can reinforce denial. When the environment changes in such a way as to render the old skills and strengths less relevant, we almost instinctively cling to our past. We refuse to acknowledge changes around us, almost like a child who doesn't like what he's seeing, so he closes his eyes and counts to 100 and figures that what bothered him will go away. We too close our eyes and are willing to work harder, to dedicate ourselves to our traditional tasks or skills, in the hope that they and hard work will get us there by the count of 100. The phrase you're likely to hear at such times is just give us a bit more time. Strategic dissonance. As we begin to respond, maybe too little too late, we face another emotional hurdle, to admit to ourselves consciously and explicitly the magnitude of the problem we are struggling with. Even as our actions begin to reflect the process of adjusting to the new environment, we still struggle with the task of describing them in clear words. Recall the story of how Intel exited the memory business. The company had been adjusting wafer allocation for some time, yet when I was asked point blank about our plans, I had difficulty explaining them in plain English. I have seen many companies fall into the same trap of saying one thing and doing another while they are in the midst of coping with a strategic inflection point. I call this divergence between actions and statements strategic dissonance. It is one of the surest indications that a company is struggling with a strategic inflection point. Why is strategic dissonance so inevitable? What brings it about? The process of adapting to change starts with employees who, through their daily work, adjust to the new outside forces. The Intel production schedulers shifted wafer capacity from memories to microprocessors because the latter were more profitable. Meanwhile, we senior managers were trapped by the inertia of our previous success. After all, we had grown up as a memory producer, that's what we had been good at and that's what shaped our view of ourselves. Consequently, while frontline employees and middle managers were implementing and executing strategic actions that said one thing, senior management was still issuing high-level strategic pronouncements that said the exact opposite. What tips you off to emerging strategic dissonance? Signs of strategic dissonance often surface when senior managers engage their middle management or their sales force in a free-flowing discussion, provided that the discussion takes place in a culture that permits open confrontation. This is how it works at Intel. Occasionally, when I stand in front of such a group and field questions, I find it awkward to attempt to defend the position of the corporation in the face of some specific questions and comments that come from people who are wise to their world and their environment. Often these questions come in the form of follow-up questions after I have been asked about our specific strategy regarding a particular product, customer, or technology. After I have given my well-practiced answer, the follow-up question may start with "but what about," or "does it mean that?" Such questions usually represent sharp probing for the true intent behind the general answer I've just given. To be sure, they may be triggered by my not having been clear enough. But, on the other hand, they might be caused by a growing dissonance between my well-worn answer and a diverging reality. If it's the latter case, this may be the first sign of a strategic dissonance and prompts me to say to myself, "Grove, listen up, something is not quite right here." Strategic dissonance is so much an automatic reaction to a strategic inflection point that probing for it is perhaps the best test of one. When people in the company start asking questions like "but how can we say X when we do," more than anything else this is a tip-off that a strategic inflection point may very well be in the making. Experimentation. While this dissonance between what the company does and what management says is understandable, it accompanies a terribly unproductive and distressing phase. The growing discomfort associated with strategic dissonance creates confusion and uncertainty even in the best of minds. You know that something substantial is not right, something is different, but you don't know what it is, you don't know how significant it really is, and you don't know what to do about it. Resolution of strategic dissonance does not come in the form of a figurative light bulb going on. It comes through experimentation. Loosen up the level of control that your organization normally is accustomed to. Let people try different techniques, review different products, exploit different sales channels, and go after different customers. Much as management has been devoted to making and keeping order in the company, at times like this they must become more tolerant of the new and the different. Only stepping out of the old ruts will bring new insights. The operating phrase should be, let chaos reign. Not that chaos is good in general. It's awfully inefficient and wearing on all participants. But the old order won't give way to the new without a phase of experimentation and chaos in between. The dilemma is that you can't suddenly start experimenting when you realize you're in trouble unless you've been experimenting all along. It's too late to do it once things have changed in your core business. Ideally, you should have experimented with new products, technologies, channels, promotions, and new customers all along. Then, when you sense that something has changed, you will have a number of experiments that can be relied on to expand your bag of tricks, and your organization will be in a much better position to expand the scope of experimentation and to tolerate the increased level of chaos that is the precursor for repositioning the company in a new business direction. Intel experimented with microprocessors for over 10 years before the opportunity and imperative arose to make them the centerpiece of our corporate strategy. During this period of time, microprocessors were not our main line. In fact, for a number of years we spent more money on developing and marketing them than they generated in revenue. But we kept at it. Our microprocessor business gradually grew, and, when our circumstances changed in a big way, we had a more appealing business to focus our resources on. Experiments are not without controversy. Consider the conflict at Intel in the late 1980s between the 1860 RISC processor and the 486 CISC processor described in Chapter 6. While our stated strategy was to be fully dedicated to maintaining a compatible family of microprocessors, we allowed some of our best people to put their efforts and creative energies into developing a new architecture in the form of the 1860. That was not all bad. Had the old technology run out of steam, embracing the new technology might very well have been the right thing for us to do. Experimenting with it gave us a head start to make such a shift, had it been necessary. However, by letting this experiment grow and bubble up and reach the marketplace, the experiment itself grew to be a very large force affecting the company. It divided our efforts, muddied the waters about which microprocessor technology the company stood for, and eventually could have weakened our entire microprocessor thrust. In short, it created chaos. We needed to deal with it one way or another, either by taking advantage of our momentum in the standard microprocessor market to create a new risk branch, or by decisively reining in the experiment. The business bubble. As in many sports, timing is everything. The same action taken in business early on may do the job, taken later on, it may well fall short because it won't be enough. By early I mean acting while the momentum of your existing business is strong, while the cash flow is there, and while the organization is intact. The momentum of a still healthy business provides you with a benign bubble within which you can work on repositioning the company. Under the protection of this bubble you can make changes far more easily than when the vital signs of your business have all turned south. In other words, it is best when senior management recognizes and accepts the inevitability of a strategic inflection point early on and acts before the vitality of the business has been sapped by the 10x forces affecting it. The necessary transformation of the business will likely be a lot less wrenching and more successful if proper action is taken early and enforced decisively. The reality, unfortunately, is that we tend to do exactly the opposite. Owing precisely to the emotional factors described earlier, most management will do too little too late and therefore fritter away the protection that the bubble of their existing business would otherwise have provided them with. It's easy to see why. There's no panic in the early stages of an inflection point. One can couch the arguments for inaction in the early stages in statements like "we shouldn't tinker with the golden goose" or "how could we possibly take our best people away from the business that pays all of our salaries and put them on some speculative new project," or the most alarming one of all, "the organization can take just so much change, it's not ready for more," meaning really, I'm not ready to lead the organization into the changes that it needs to face. Looking back over my own career, I have never made a tough change, whether it involved resource shifts or personnel moves, that I haven't wished I had made a year or so earlier. Recall Intel's memory episode. We had been losing money in memories for quite some time. Yet we only reacted when the rest of our business went into a recession also. Next only acted when their cash needs forced them to. The previously immensely successful Compaq was slow to act forcefully as the personal computer business turned into a lower margin, commodity-like business. It took a 6-month decline in revenue, profits, and market share, including a $70 million loss and its first ever layoffs before Compaq's board of directors took draconian steps. This tendency is easy to see in others, although we are prone to blindness when we do it ourselves. The other day I met with a manager of a company that is struggling with a strategic change. I was urging him to act aggressively in adopting a new direction. It was easy for me to encourage him. After all, I didn't have to do anything, while he had to force his organization into a set of actions that would mean discontinuing some products that they had already committed to their customers. He knew that he needed to act. In fact, he was making some moves in the right direction. Yet these moves were pitifully inadequate in my view. They adjusted things at the margins, they dropped a few less successful versions of the product, whereas what he needed to do was discontinue the product altogether and redeploy development resources into obvious and far more promising directions. I wasn't any smarter than he, I was just unfettered by the responsibility of actually having to order up the changes. When, during Intel's memory crisis, I was in this manager's shoes, for a long time I too was guilty of the same too little too late syndrome. Ideally, the fear of a new environment sneaking up on us should keep us on our toes. Our sense of urgency should be aided by our judgment, instincts, and observations that have been honed by decades spent in the business world. The fact is, because of our experience, very often we managers know that we need to do something. We even know what we should be doing. But we don't trust our instincts or don't act on them early enough to take advantage of the benign business bubble. We must discipline ourselves to overcome our tendency to do too little too late. A new industry map. The too little too late syndrome is particularly hazardous in a shifting industry environment. Implicit in doing business every day is a mental map of the structure of the industry. This map is composed of an unstated set of rules and relationships, ways, and means of doing business, what's done and how it is done and what's not done, who matters and who doesn't, whose opinion you can count on and whose opinion is usually wrong, and so on. If you've been in the industry for a long time, knowing these things has become second nature. You don't even think about them, you just know that's the way things are. But when the structure of the industry changes, all of these elements change too. The mental map that you have been carrying with you all these years and relied upon in charting your company's course of action suddenly loses its validity. However, you haven't had a chance to replace it with a new mental map. You haven't made the explicit substitutions about how things are done now versus how they were done before, or who matters now versus who mattered then. All of us in the computing industry had to deal with the concept of a transition from the vertical to the horizontal industry model. The fundamental implication of this model was and is that the player with the largest share of a horizontal layer is the one who wins. As this realization sank in at Intel, it reinforced our belief in the significance of compatibility with all of the rest of the horizontal layers and provided further encouragement for our drive toward high volume and low cost in our microprocessor business, toward improving our scale and scope. Likewise, When Compaq executed a major restructuring and strategic change in 1991, their actions also represented a recognition of the importance of scale and scope implicit in the horizontal model. During a strategic inflection point, management continually has to refine its conception of the strategic map of the industry. We all automatically do this in our heads. But mental maps are awfully forgiving of ambiguity. You must force yourself to commit your thoughts to paper. Where do you begin? Every company has organizational charts, sometimes piles of them, that show the interrelationship of the organizational units. If those are needed to help employees figure out how to operate inside a company, wouldn't an equivalent diagram of an industry be extremely helpful? So develop one. In Chapter 9, I'll show an example of one that helped me to sort out some things about the Internet. Much as your business needs to experiment with new technologies and methods of distribution, as a senior manager, you need to experiment with filling in the details of the new industry structure. Try out your evolving map on your close associates. You will need to discuss it in a friendly audience many times to clarify your own mind. But there is another benefit, too. These discussions will help get your organization ready for change. In a modern organization, rapid response to market forces depends on the autonomous actions of middle managers. Their ranks include know-how managers, the technical and marketing experts whose command of the fundamentals of the business is vital to the company's doing the right thing. If senior managers and know-how managers share a common view of the industry, the likelihood of their acknowledging changes in the environment and responding in an appropriate fashion will greatly increase. Sharing a common picture of the map of the industry and its dynamics is a key tool in making your organization an adaptive one. Whether you are a senior manager, middle manager, or know-how manager, as you improve your map, it will increasingly guide you toward better actions in your business and toward greater confidence that your actions are right. Reign in chaos. Clarity of direction, which includes describing what we are going after as well as describing what we will not be going after, is exceedingly important at the late stage of a strategic transformation. When I think about what it's like to get through a strategic inflection point, I'm reminded of a classic scene in old Western movies in which a bedraggled group of riders is traveling through a hostile landscape. They don't know exactly where they are going, they only know that they can't turn back and must trust that they will eventually reach a place where things are better. Taking an organization through a strategic inflection point is a march through unknown territory. The rules of business are unfamiliar or have not yet been formed. Consequently, you and your associates lack a mental map of the new environment, and even the shape of your desired goal is not completely clear. Things are tense. Often in the course of traversing a strategic inflection point, your people lose confidence in you and in each other, and what's worse, you lose confidence in yourself. Members of management are likely to blame one another for the tough times the company is experiencing. Infighting ensues, arguments as to what direction to take bubble up and proliferate. Then, at some point, you, the leader, begin to sense a vague outline of the new direction. By this time, however, your company is dispirited, demoralized, or just plain tired. Getting this far took a lot of energy from you. You must now reach into whatever reservoir of energy you have left to motivate yourself and, most importantly, the people who depend on you so you can become healthy again. I think of this hostile landscape through which you and your company must struggle or else perish as the valley of death. It is an inevitable part of every strategic inflection point. You can't avoid it, nor can you make it less perilous, but you can do a better job of dealing with it. Traversing the valley of death. To make it through the valley of death successfully, your first task is to form a mental image of what the company should look like when you get to the other side. This image not only needs to be clear enough for you to visualize, but it also has to be crisp enough so you can communicate it simply to your tired, demoralized and confused staff. Will Intel be a broad-based semiconductor company, a memory company or a microprocessor company? Will Next be a computer company or a software company? What exactly is your bookstore going to be about? Will it be a pleasant place to drink coffee and read or a place where you go to buy books at a discount? You need to answer these questions in a single phrase that everybody can remember and, over time, can understand to mean exactly what you intended. In 1986, when we came up with the slogan Intel, the microcomputer company, that was exactly what we were trying to achieve. The phrase didn't say anything about semiconductors, it didn't say anything about memories. It was meant to project our mental image of the company as we would emerge from the valley of death that the 198586 memory debacle/strategic inflection point represented for us. Management writers use the word vision for this. That's too lofty for my taste. What you're trying to do is capture the essence of the company and the focus of its business. You are trying to define what the company will be, yet that can only be done if you also undertake to define what the company will not be. Doing this should actually be a little easier at this point because, as you're coming out of a very bad period, you're likely to have extremely strong feelings about what you don't want to be. By 1986 we knew we did not want to be in the memory business any longer. We knew it with a passion that only comes after struggling with a business and finding that we were no better off for those struggles. There are dangers in this approach, the danger of oversimplifying the identity of the company, of narrowing its strategic focus too much, so that some people will say, but what about my part of the business, does this mean that we are no longer interested in that? After all, Intel continued to do things other than microprocessors. We even continued to maintain a substantial business in a different type of semiconductor memories. But the danger of oversimplification pales in comparison with the danger of catering to the desire of every manager to be included in the simple description of the refocused business, therefore making that description so lofty and so inclusive as to be meaningless. Consider the following example that shows the value of a strong strategic focus. Lotus's identity for its first 10 years was as a supplier of personal computer software, specifically spreadsheets. Owing to some missteps of their own but, most importantly, because of a 10x increase in the forces of competition, what the Japanese memory producers were to us, Microsoft's presence in application software was to them, Lotus's core business weakened over time. But while this was happening, Lotus had developed a new generation of software, embodied in their product notes, that promised to bring the same kind of productivity gains to groups that spreadsheets had brought to individuals. Even as Lotus was struggling with spreadsheets and its related software business, its management committed itself to group computing to the extent of de-emphasizing their spreadsheet business. It continued to invest in developing notes throughout these difficult years, and it mounted a major marketing and development program that suffused all the corporate statements. To be sure, the story is still evolving. But from the standpoint of giving the company an unequivocal future, Lotus's management did exactly the right thing. It was Lotus's strength in notes that ultimately motivated IBM to purchase the company for $3.5 billion. Now consider an opposite example of a company floundering to define itself. Recently, I met with a senior manager of a company with whom we were trying to collaborate to ensure that their product and our product worked together. To make this deal click, they needed to make some clear decisions about which technologies they were devoted to and which they weren't. I was dealing with a man at the second highest level of his company, yet I found him torn and indecisive. On the one hand, he seemed convinced that we should work together, on the other hand, he seemed almost paralyzed when he needed to commit to the necessary actions to make this collaboration happen. A couple of days later his boss, the chief executive officer, was quoted making statements about the company's intentions that unequivocally supported the direction I thought my visitor was leaning toward. I tore the article out of the newspaper, waved it in the face of my associates and announced, "I think we are in business." My euphoria lasted 24 hours. The next day's newspaper brought a retraction, described as a clarification. It was all a big misunderstanding. Now think for a moment of what it must be like to be a marketing or sales manager being buffeted by such ambiguities coming from your boss. Not only that, imagine what it would feel like to read about his direction du jour when it appears in the newspaper. How can you motivate yourself to continue to follow a leader when he appears to be going around in circles? I can't help but wonder why leaders are so often hesitant to lead. I guess it takes a lot of conviction and trusting your gut to get ahead of your peers, your staff and your employees while they are still squabbling about which path to take, and set an unhesitating, unequivocal course whose rightness or wrongness will not be known for years. Such a decision really tests the mettle of the leader. By contrast, it doesn't take much self-confidence to downsize a company after all. How can you go wrong by shuttering factories and laying people off if the benefits of such actions are going to show up in tomorrow's bottom line and will be applauded by the financial community? Getting through strategic inflection points represents a fundamental transformation of your company from what you were to what you will be. The reason such a transformation is so hard is that all parts of the company were shaped by what you had been in the past. If you and your staff got your experience managing a computer company, how can you even imagine managing a software company? If you got your experience managing a broad-based semiconductor company, how can you even imagine what a microcomputer company might be like? Not surprisingly, the transformation implicit in surviving a strategic inflection point involves changing members of management one way or another. I remember a meeting of our executive staff in which we were discussing Intel's new direction as a microcomputer company. Our chairman, Gordon Moore, said, "You know, if we're really serious about this, half of our executive staff had better become software types in 5 years' time." The implication was that either the people in the room needed to change their areas of knowledge and expertise or the people themselves needed to be changed. I remember looking around the room, wondering who might remain and who might not. As it turned out, Gordon Moore was right. In our case, about half the management transformed themselves and were able to move in the new direction. Others ended up leaving the company. Seeing, imagining, and sensing the new shape of things is the first step. Be clear in this but be realistic also. Don't compromise and don't kid yourself. If you are describing a purpose that deep down you know you can't achieve, you are dooming your chances of climbing out of the valley of death. Redeploying resources. As Drucker suggests, the key activity that's required in the course of transforming an organization is a wholesale shifting of resources from what was appropriate for the old idea of the business to what is appropriate for the new. Over the 3 years that the production planners at Intel gradually cut the allotment of wafer production for memories and moved it to microprocessors, they were shifting rare and valuable resources from an area of lower value to an area of higher value. But raw materials are not your only resource. Your best people, their knowledge, skills, and expertise are an equally important resource. When we recently assigned a key manager from overseeing our next generation of microprocessors to a brand new communications product line which is not likely to make us money for several years, we were shifting an extremely valuable resource. While he was very productive in his former area, there were others equally good to take his place there, while the new area badly needed the turbocharging his presence would give it. A person's time is an extremely valuable yet manifestly finite resource. When Intel was making its transformation from a semiconductor company to a microcomputer company, I realized that I needed to learn more about the software world. After all, how we would do our job depended on the plans, thoughts, desires, and visions of the software industry. So I deliberately started to spend a significant amount of time getting acquainted with software people. I set out to visit heads of software companies. I called them up one at a time, made appointments, met with them and asked them to talk to me about their business as it were, to teach me. This entailed some personal risk. It required swallowing my pride and admitting how little I knew about their business. I had to walk into conversations with important people whom I had never met, not having a clue how they would respond. It also required a measure of diligence. As I sat talking with these people, I took copious notes, some of which I understood and some of which I didn't. I then took the stuff that I didn't understand back to our internal experts and asked them to explain what this individual might have meant by it. Basically, I went back to school. I was aided by the fact that Intel is a schoolish company, where it's perfectly respectable for a senior person with 20 years of experience to take some time, buckle down and learn a whole new set of skills. Admitting that you need to learn something new is always difficult. It is even harder if you are a senior manager who is accustomed to the automatic deference which people accord you owing to your position. But if you don't fight it, that very deference may become a wall that isolates you from learning new things. It all takes self-discipline. The discipline of redeployment is needed in spades when it comes to your personal time. When I started on this software study, I had to take the time I spent on it away from other things. In other words, I had to be the production planner of my own time and had to reallocate the way I spent time at work. This brought with it its own difficulties because people who were accustomed to seeing me periodically no longer saw me as often as they used to. They started asking questions like, "Does this mean you no longer care about what we do?" I placated them as best I could. I reassigned tasks among other managers and, after a while, people accepted this as well as many other changes as being part of Intel's new direction. But it wasn't easy for them or me. The point is that redeploying resources sounds like such an innocuous term. It implies that you're putting more attention and energy into something, which is wonderful, positive, and encouraging. But the inevitable counterpart is that you're subtracting from someplace else. You're taking something away, production resources, managerial resources, or your own time. A strategic transformation requires discipline and redeployment of all resources. Without them, it turns out to be nothing more than an empty cliché. One more word about your own time. If you're in a leadership position, how you spend your time has enormous symbolic value. It will communicate what's important or what isn't far more powerfully than all the speeches you can give. Strategic change doesn't just start at the top. It starts with your calendar. Leading via strategic actions. Assigning or reassigning resources in order to pursue a strategic goal is an example of what I call strategic action. I'm convinced that corporate strategy is formulated by a series of such actions, far more so than through conventional top-down strategic planning. In my experience, the latter always turns into sterile statements, rarely gaining traction in the real work of the corporation. Strategic actions, on the other hand, always have real impact. What's the difference? Strategic plans are statements of what we intend to do. Strategic actions are steps we have already taken or are taking which suggest our longer-term intent. Strategic plans sound like a political speech. Strategic actions are concrete steps. They vary. They can be the assignment of an up-and-coming player to a new area of responsibility. They can be the opening of sales offices in a portion of the world where we haven't done business before. They can be a cutback in the development effort that deals with a long-pursued area of our business. All of these are real and suggest directional changes. While strategic plans are abstract and are usually couched in language that has no concrete meaning except to the company's management, strategic actions matter because they immediately affect people's lives. They change people's work, as was the case when we shifted capacity from memory production to microprocessor production and our sales force had a different product mix. They cause consternation and raise eyebrows, as did the transfer of the Intel manager from the tried and true microprocessor business to an ambiguous new area. Strategic plans deal with events that are so far in the future that they have little relevance to what you actually have to do today. So they don't command true attention. Strategic actions, however, take place in the present. Consequently, they command immediate attention. Their power comes from this very aspect. Even if any one strategic action changes the trajectory on which the corporation moves by only a few degrees, if those actions are consistent with the image of what the company should look like when it gets to the other side of the inflection point, every one of them will reinforce every other. That's why I think the most effective way to transform a company is through a series of incremental changes that are consistent with a clearly articulated end result. Yet strategic inflection points are times that can also benefit from more drastic and higher profile strategic actions. By higher profile, I mean that they are seen, heard, and questioned by many people. Take the example I described earlier when the statement by the chief executive of the company we were trying to do business with was quoted in the newspaper. It caused a large number of raised eyebrows and scores of "does this mean that?" questions. It afforded a perfect opportunity to reinforce a new strategic direction on a broad scale. Unfortunately, the next day's retraction laid waste to this opportunity. But while it is good for strategic actions during an inflection point to raise eyebrows, they must also be timed just right. Strategic actions, especially those involving redeployment, are like the actions of runners in a relay race. Runners need to pass the baton at precisely the right moment. Being even a little bit early or a little bit late will slow down the team. The timing of the transfer of resources from the old to the new has to be done with this crucial balance in mind. If you move resources from the old business, the old task, the old product too early, you may leave a task only 80% finished. With a little bit more effort, you could have reaped the full benefit. On the other hand, if you hang on to the old business too long, the opportunity for grabbing a new business opportunity, to add momentum to a new product area, to get aligned with the new order of things, may be lost. There is a period in between that provides the best compromise, when you have invested enough in the old business that it has momentum to get you through the period of transition while you deploy your resources to the new target area. This timing dilemma is illustrated below. Resource shift dilemma. Resource shift is premature, previous task is timing is right, momentum of existing strategy is still positive, new threat or opportunity has been verified. Resource shift is late, opportunity for transformation is lost, previous task is not completed, opportunity has been verified, transformation is lost, decline may be irreversible. When is the time right? When the momentum of your existing strategy is still positive, your business is still growing, your customers and complementers still think highly of you, yet there's enough evidence of blips on your radar screen to warrant, at a minimum, exploring their significance. If your exploration confirms that they are real and are gaining, shift more resources onto them. Your tendency will almost always be to wait too long. Yet the consequences of being early are less onerous than the consequences of being late. If you act too early, chances are the momentum of your previous business is still healthy. Therefore, even if you're wrong, you're in a better position to course correct. For instance, you can even pull back to their old jobs people whom you've reassigned to other areas. Since they come from those tasks, they can pick up the pieces again in no time and help out. But management's tendency is to hang on to the old, so their strategic actions are more likely to happen later rather than earlier. The risk is that if you are late, you may already be in an irreversible decline. Simply put, in times of change, managers almost always know which direction they should go in, but usually act too late and do too little. Correct for this tendency, advance the pace of your actions and increase their magnitude. You'll find that you're more likely to be close to right. The best moment to act varies from company to company. Some companies recognize that their key strengths are rapid response and fast execution. Such companies may profitably wait for others to test the limits of technological possibilities or market acceptance and then commit to following, catching up and passing them. I describe such a strategy as a tail light approach. When you drive in the fog, it is a lot easier to drive fast if you're chasing the tail lights of the car ahead of you. The danger with a tail light strategy is that, once you catch up and pass, you will find yourself without a set of tail lights to follow and without the confidence and competence in setting your own course in a new direction. Being an early mover involves different risks. The biggest danger facing an early mover company is that it may have a hard time distinguishing a signal from a noise and start to respond to an inflection point that isn't one. Moreover, even if it is right in its response, it is likely to be ahead of its market and will run a greater risk of getting caught up in the dangers of the first instantiation, as described in Chapter 6. But offsetting these dangers is the possibility of greater rewards. The early movers are the only companies that have the potential to affect the structure of the industry and to define how the game is played by others. Only by such a strategy can you hope to compete for the future and shape your destiny to your advantage. In recent years, we at Intel decided that we have a tremendous opportunity to exploit the personal computer as a universal information appliance. This wasn't always possible. The traditional PC was largely used as a replacement for data entry terminals capable of displaying numbers and text appropriate only for commercial transactions. However, over the last several years, technology has brought appealing visual capabilities to the PC, endowing it with colorful graphics, sound, and video, while retaining its important traditional characteristic, interactivity. But while we saw the possibility of exploiting these capabilities and envisioned the PC as being in the middle of the information and entertainment revolution that was taking place around us, much of the rest of the world thought that all of these developments would take place around a more familiar television set. So we threw ourselves completely behind the concept that the PC would be the center of all these developments. The battle cry was "the PC is it," and launched an industry-wide campaign to proselytize our view. At the same time, we aligned all of our technical developments inside the company to make the PC an even more compelling choice for this task. We were and still are trying to shape our future at a time when this idea doesn't have broad currency. We were and are trying to be early movers. A question that often comes up at times of strategic transformation is, should you pursue a highly focused approach, betting everything on one strategic goal, or should you hedge? The question may come in the form of an employee asking me, "Andy, shouldn't we be investing in areas other than microprocessors instead of putting all of our eggs in one basket?" Or, "Andy, shouldn't we work on enhancing the television set in addition to betting on personal computers?" I tend to believe Mark Twain hit it on the head when he said, "Put all of your eggs in one basket and watch that basket." It takes every erg of energy in your organization to do a good job pursuing one strategic aim, especially in the face of aggressive and competent competition. There are several reasons for this. First, it is very hard to lead an organization out of the valley of death without a clear and simple strategic direction. After all, getting there sapped the energy of your organization, it demoralized your employees and often set them against one another. Demoralized organizations are unlikely to be able to deal with multiple objectives in their actions. It will be hard enough to lead them out with a single one. If competition is chasing you, and they always are, this is why only the paranoid survive. You only get out of the valley of death by outrunning the people who are after you. And you can only outrun them if you commit yourself to a particular direction and go as fast as you can. You could argue that, since they are chasing you, you should give yourself all sorts of alternative directions, in other words, hedge. I say, no. Hedging is expensive and dilutes commitment. Without exquisite focus, the resources and energy of the organization will be spread a mile wide and they will be an inch deep. Second, while you're going through the valley of death, you may think you see the other side, but you can't be sure whether it's truly the other side or just a mirage. Yet you have to commit yourself to a certain course and a certain pace, otherwise you will run out of water and energy before long. If you're wrong, you will die. But most companies don't die because they are wrong, most die because they don't commit themselves. They fritter away their momentum and their valuable resources while attempting to make a decision. The greatest danger is in standing still. The clarity imperative. When a company is meandering, its management staff is demoralized. When the management staff is demoralized, nothing works, every employee feels paralyzed. This is exactly when you need to have a strong leader setting a direction. And it doesn't even have to be the best direction, just a strong, clear one. Organizations in the valley of death have a natural tendency to drift back into the morass of confusion. They are very sensitive to obscure or ambiguous signals from their management. Heads of companies often inadvertently contribute to this confusion. Some time ago, a business reporter told me of an encounter with the head of a major Japanese corporation. The reporter was working on a profile of the company. When he asked questions that tried to clarify the strategy of the corporation, the other man angrily retorted, "Why would I tell you our strategy? So I could help our competitors." I think this man wouldn't talk about his strategy not because he was afraid of helping his competitors but because he didn't have one. This company's public statements have always struck me as extraordinarily ambiguous. Another way to fuel confusion is to give conflicting messages. At times of transition, pronouncements from the heads of organizations are painstakingly scrutinized and greatly amplified, especially by employees. Earlier I described an executive who retracted a statement about his company's strategic direction that had already appeared in the newspapers. After that retraction, his credibility had to have been damaged. He will have to work that much harder to impart direction and have people believe it. In other words, screw up once and it will take a lot more work later to communicate the right message to correct your mistake. The point is this: how can you hope to mobilize a large team of employees to pull together, accept new and different job assignments, work in an uncertain environment and work hard despite the uncertainty of their future, if the leader of the company can't or won't articulate the shape of the other side of the valley? Clarity of direction, which includes describing what we are going after as well as describing what we will not be going after, is exceedingly important at the late stage of a strategic transformation. Much as in the middle of the strategic inflection process you needed to let chaos reign in order to explore your alternatives, to lead your organization out of the resulting ambiguity and to energize your staff toward a new direction, you must reign in chaos. The time for listening to the Cassandras is over. The time for experimentation is also over. The time to issue marching orders, exquisitely clear marching orders to the organization, is here. And the time to commit the resources of the corporation as well as your own resources, your own time, visibility, speeches, statements in external forums, which are always given more credibility inside the company than what you say directly to your employees, is upon you. Most of all, you must be a role model of the new strategy. That is the best way to prove that you are committed to it. How do you role model a strategy? By showing your interest in the elements that lead to the strategic direction, by getting involved in the details that are appropriate to the new direction, and by withdrawing attention, energy, and involvement from those things that don't fit. Overcorrect your actions, recognizing that the symbolic nature of your actions will amplify their impact within the organization. You can overcorrect by neglecting or overdelegating details in areas that, while still important, do not fit your immediate strategic needs. There's a danger in de-emphasizing some important things, but that's a risk you have to take. If, as a result of your overcorrection and neglect, some of the nuts and bolts of your daily work get dropped, you can always go back and pick them up later. What you can't correct is failing to make the appropriate high-profile strategic shift at the right moment. At times like this, your calendar becomes your most important strategic tool. Most executive schedules are shaped by the inertia of prior actions. You are likely to accept appointments, attend meetings, and schedule activities that are similar to what you had been doing in the past. Break the mold now. Resist the tacit temptation to accept invitations or make appointments because you have done so in the past. Ask yourself the questions: will going to this meeting teach me about the new technology or the new market that I think is very important now? Will it introduce me to people who can help me in the new direction? Will it send a message about the importance of the new direction? If so, go to it. If not, resist it. The point is this: you can't hedge in a choice of direction and you can't hedge in your commitment to it. If you do, your people will be confused and after a while they will throw up their hands in resignation. Not only will you lose direction, but you will continue to sap the energy of your organization as well. A difficulty in role modeling a new strategic action is that leaders of large organizations, by the nature of their jobs, are often distanced from direct contact with many managers and employees. You can't talk to everybody, you can't look all of them in the eye and argue your point. So you need to find a way to project your determination, will and vision over a distance, much as the forces of a strong magnet affect iron filings. When you have to reach large numbers of people, you can't possibly over-communicate and over-clarify. Give a lot of speeches to your employees, go to their workplaces, get them together and explain over and over what you're trying to achieve. Take particular care to answer questions of the "does it mean that?" variety. Those are the ones that offer the best chance of bringing your message home. Your new thoughts and new arguments will take a while to sink in. But you will find that repetition sharpens your articulation of the new direction and makes it increasingly clear to your employees. So speak and answer questions as often as possible. While it may seem like you're repeating yourself, in reality you will be reinforcing a strategic message. Middle management has a special role to play here. More than anyone, middle management can help you project your message over a distance. By including them in your thinking and doing a particularly good job of enlisting them as sources of amplification of your new direction, you can multiply your presence many times. Take extra time with them because otherwise you risk losing their wholehearted commitment. The best aspect of this type of exposure is that you will test whether you can pass the gauntlet of your employees' questions, assuming you have the kind of corporate culture in which they feel comfortable questioning you. Your employees' questions are usually shrewd, and in a free environment they can question you in a way that no one else can. If there is strategic illogic in your thinking, they will sniff it out and poke at it. This is not fun. You may want to hide from exposing the holes in your strategic thinking. After all, having them on display in front of a group of your own employees would be embarrassing, wouldn't it? Yet I think it would be far better to let your employees find them when there's still time to make corrections than to allow the marketplace to find them later. Technology can help you here. Email gives us a very powerful new way to reach large numbers of people. In most modern organizations, every computer is connected to a corporate network through which it can send messages to every other computer on that network. By spending minutes in front of his computer, a manager can leave his mark on the thoughts of dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of people in his organization, and do so with the immediacy that only the bounds of electronic communications can generate. One caveat: if your message is clear, it will provoke questions and responses which will come back to you through the same medium. Answer them. You don't have to make a lot of time for that. A response of 2 or 3 lines can communicate the essence of your position. This is a high-leverage activity. Your message will reach not just the individual to whom you are sending it, but is likely to be sent on to other employees of the network, reverberating, as it were, from computer to computer. So consider this as the electronic equivalent of answering a question at an employee forum. Be crisp and to the point, and your response will help move the thinking of employees toward the desired direction. I spend some 2 hours a day reading and responding to messages that come to me from all over the world. I don't generally read them all in one chunk, but I almost always make sure that I'm caught up before my day is done. I have found that I can project my thoughts, reactions, biases and preferences very effectively through this means. Equally important is the opportunity that incoming email gives me to be exposed to the thoughts, reactions, biases and preferences of large numbers of people. More Cassandras bring me news from the periphery this way than through any other means. I witness more arguments, I hear more business gossip, sometimes from people I have never met, than I ever did when I could walk the halls of the one building that housed all Intel employees. What used to be referred to as managing by walking around has to a large extent been supplanted by letting your fingers do the walking on your computer keyboard. Given that Intel has now spread all around the world and I couldn't walk the halls of our 60-odd buildings even if I spent full time at it, this has become doubly important. A lot of times, management attempts to communicate a new strategic direction by the medium of closed-circuit television or pre-recorded videotape. This may seem like a logical and easy thing to do, but it won't work. The interactive element, the give and take, the opportunity to ask the "does it mean that?" type of question is lost in this one-way medium. If your employees don't have an opportunity to test your thinking in live sessions or electronically, your message will seem like so much hot air. Resist the temptation to do what's easy here. Communicating strategic change in an interactive, exposed fashion is not easy. But it is absolutely necessary. Adjusting to the new. Gordon Moore's comment that half our staff would need to become software types in 5 years' time was a very valid insight, and one that has an equivalent in every company that's struggling with a 10x force. Simply put, you can't change a company without changing its management. I'm not saying they have to pack up their desks and be replaced. I'm saying that they themselves, every one of them, needs to change to be more in tune with the mandates of the new environment. They may need to go back to school, they may need a new assignment, they may need to spend some years in a foreign post. They need to adapt. If they can't or won't, however, they will need to be replaced with others who are more in tune with the new world the company is heading to. In our case, we achieved the changes in our management along the lines Gordon suggested. To be sure, some managers left and were replaced by others from within Intel whose backgrounds were much closer to the new requirements. But most of us learned new tricks. For example, as I described, I invested a fair amount of time in learning about the strategies of the software companies in the personal computer industry and establishing relationships with their managers. Others undertook parallel transitions to new assignments. Some even took a step back to a lower-level assignment, a demotion, and, fortified by experiences from which they learned skills that were more appropriate to our new direction, later rose back again in the management ranks. We do this often enough that it is an accepted way for managers to learn the new skills they need as the company heads in a new direction. Intel isn't alone in exhibiting adaptive behavior. A company that has consistently been able to adapt to new directions over 50 years is Hewlett-Packard. I had the opportunity to see how they go about it. In recent years, the management of Hewlett-Packard decided to base their future microprocessor needs on Intel's microprocessor technology. The implication of that was that their computer business, which now uses a microprocessor that they designed themselves, would have to grow to rely on a microprocessor that would be available not just to them but to their competition. This is a profound change for their business, and it had to have been a very hard decision to reach. I witnessed some of the discussions in meetings we had with them, and catching even a glimpse of the process gave me a sense as to why Hewlett-Packard has such a spectacular record of navigating transformations. The discussions were rational, non-threatening and slow, but they steadily moved forward instead of meandering around in circles. Sometimes management may see the need for a dramatically different new direction but not be able to bring the rest of the company along with them. I have seen a videotape of John Sculley, CEO of Apple Computer from 1983 to 1993, telling a Harvard Business School gathering that two of the biggest mistakes of his career were not adapting Apple's software to Intel's microprocessors and not modifying Apple's then revolutionary laser printer so that it would work with PCs other than those made by Apple. I was stunned when I heard this. Listening to Sculley gave me the impression that he understood the implications of the horizontal industry structure. It appeared that he just wasn't strong enough to overpower Apple's inertia of success that existed because of its 15-year history as a fully vertical computer company. Then there is the intriguing case of Wang Laboratories. Under the leadership of the founder, Dr. N. Wang, the company had gone through a tremendous transformation, from being a producer of desktop calculators to becoming a pioneer in distributed word processing systems. Dr. Wang understood these technologies and had an extremely strong hold on his company. His vision was law, and his vision was generally spot on. But by 1989, when the PC revolution became truly significant, Dr. Wang was very ill. Without his firm hand at the helm and without senior managers who could step in and define the company's new identity in this time of change, the company lost its strategic direction. This time the company didn't make it through the transformation and actually ended up in Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Why couldn't Apple and Wang reign in chaos? It seems that companies that successfully navigate through strategic inflection points have a good dialectic between bottom-up and top-down actions. Bottom-up actions come from the ranks of middle managers, who by the nature of their jobs are exposed to the first whiffs of the winds of change, who are located at the periphery of the action where change is first perceived. Remember, snow melts at the periphery, and who therefore catch on early. But, by the nature of their work, they can only affect things locally. The production planners can affect wafer allocation, but they can hardly affect marketing strategy. Their actions must meet halfway the actions generated by senior management. While those managers are isolated from the winds of change, once they commit themselves to a new direction, they can affect the strategy of the entire organization. The best results seem to prevail when bottom-up and top-down actions are equally strong. We can display this point in the following 2x2 matrix, dynamic dialectic. The best quadrant to be in is the top right one, strong top-down and strong bottom-up actions roughly balancing. Dynamic dialectic. If the actions are dynamic, if top management is able to alternately let chaos reign and then reign in chaos, such a dialectic can be very productive. When top management lets go a little, the bottom-up actions will drive toward chaos by experimenting, by pursuing different product strategies, by generally pulling the company in a multiplicity of directions. After such creative chaos reigns and a direction becomes clear, it is up to senior management to reign in chaos. A pendulum-like swing between the two types of actions is the best way to work your way through a strategic transformation. This dynamic dialectic is a must. The wisdom to guide a company through the valley of death cannot as a practical matter reside solely in the heads of top management. If senior management is a product of the legacy of the company, its thinking is molded by the old rules. If they are from the outside, chances are they really don't understand the evolving subtleties of the new direction. They must rely on middle management. Yet the burden of guidance also cannot rest solely on the judgment of middle management. They may have the detailed knowledge and the hands-on exposure, but by necessity their experience is specialized and their outlook is local, not company-wide. I learned this lesson the hard way. Intel before the crisis of the mid-1980s had a strategic planning system that was resolutely bottom-up. Middle managers were asked to prepare strategic plans for their areas, then at a detailed and lengthy session they presented their thoughts, strategies, requirements, and plans to an assembled group of senior managers. These sessions were very one-way. Middle managers did all the work leading to the presentations and they did most of the talking. We senior managers sat on the other side of the table and asked occasional questions, which worked to expose weaknesses of logic and inconsistency in the data. But our questions, which were largely nitpicky, didn't even hint at strategic directions. These sessions served their purpose as long as the overarching strategy of the company was simply to produce bigger and better semiconductor memories ahead of the competition. They filled in the details, what technology we needed to develop and how we would develop it, what products we would base on these technologies and so on. But as we began to drift into the strategic inflection point that I described in Chapter 5, the woeful inability of the system to deal with big-time change became sorely evident. How could the middle managers who were responsible for memory products deal with the larger question of do we even have a chance in the memory business in the first place? How could the head of the microprocessor organization raise the basic question, was it right for Intel to continue to put our best technology resources on the troubled memory business while starving the emerging microprocessor business? Senior management needed to step in and make some very tough moves, and ultimately, under the duress of lots of red ink, we did. But we also realized then that there must be a better way to formulate strategy. What we needed was a balanced interaction between the middle managers, with their deep knowledge but narrow focus, and senior management, whose larger perspective could set a context. The dialectic between these two would often result in searing intellectual debates. But through such debates the shape of the other side of the valley would become clear earlier, making a determined march in its direction more feasible. An organization that has a culture that can deal with these two phases, debate, chaos reigns, and a determined march, chaos reigned in, is a powerful, adaptive organization. Such an organization has two attributes: one, it tolerates and even encourages debate. These debates are vigorous, devoted to exploring issues, indifferent to rank and include individuals of varied backgrounds. 2, it is capable of making and accepting clear decisions, with the entire organization then supporting the decision. Organizations that have these characteristics are far more strategic inflection point ready than others. While the description of such a culture is seductively logical, it's not a very easy environment in which to operate, particularly if you are a newcomer to it and are not familiar with the subtle transition in the swings of the pendulum. An example comes to mind. Some time ago we hired a very competent senior manager from outside Intel as part of the process of bringing computer expertise into our management ranks. He seemed to land on his feet, seemed to enjoy the give and take characteristic of our environment and diligently tried to follow the workings of the company as he understood them. Yet he missed the essence of what made it really work. At one point he organized a committee and charged it to investigate an issue and come up with a recommendation. It turned out that this manager knew all along what he wanted to do, but instead of giving that direction to the committee, which he could have, he was hoping to engineer a bottom-up decision to the same effect. When the committee came up with the opposite recommendation, he felt cornered. At this late stage, he tried to dictate his solution to people who by now had spent months struggling with an issue and had firmed up their minds. It just couldn't be done. Coming as it did at this late stage, his dictate seemed utterly arbitrary. The workings of our corporate culture rejected it, and the man had a very hard time understanding where he went wrong. The other side of the valley. Many companies have gone through strategic inflection points. They are alive, competing, even winning. They have survived the challenges of their valleys of death and have emerged stronger than when they went in. Hewlett-Packard grew to become a $30 billion company, largely owing to their success in computers. They are second only to IBM in that business. Intel became the largest semiconductor producer in the world based on a microprocessor-centered strategy. And Intel coming out of the Pentium processor flaw crisis is stronger than ever and more in tune with its customers. Next is alive and contributing to the computer industry as a software company. AT&T and the regional Bell companies thrive, compete, and have a market valuation many times what AT&T had before the breakup. The ports of Singapore and Seattle are thriving. The Warner Brothers movie studio rode the sound wave to become a major media company. The other side of the valley of death represents a new industry order that was hard to visualize before the transition. Management did not have a mental map of the new landscape before they encountered it. Getting through the strategic inflection point required enduring a period of confusion, experimentation, and chaos, followed by a period of single-minded determination to pursue a new direction toward an initially nebulous goal. It required listening to Cassandras, deliberately fostering debates and constantly articulating the new direction, at first tentatively but more clearly with each repetition. It required casualties and personal transformation. It required accepting the fact that not all would survive and that those who did would not be the same as they had been before. Beyond a doubt, going through the valley of death that a strategic inflection point represents is one of the most daunting tasks an organization has to endure. But when 10X forces are upon us, the choice is taking on these changes or accepting an inevitable decline, which is no choice at all. The internet, signal or noise, threat or promise. Anything that can affect industries whose total revenue base is many hundreds of billions of dollars is a big deal. Netscape went public as I was working on this book. I knew of the company, and I thought that they had a lot of promise. But the way the stock skyrocketed on the first day it was available for public purchase and its continuing growth just blew me away. I could find no obvious rational explanation for this incredibly rapid stock appreciation. Something was going on, beyond merely a promising new company being discovered by a growing number of investors. Netscape's business premise was completely intertwined with the evolving Internet. And as the stocks of other Internet-based companies also soared in Netscape's wake, it became clear that the investment community's excitement had as much to do with the Internet as with Netscape. The press was not far behind. An avalanche of long feature articles followed, generally creating a dramatized confrontation between software companies that based their activities on the Internet typified by Netscape, or sometimes Sun and the established order, as exemplified by Microsoft. Something was going on, something was changing. What is the Internet anyway? For those of you who are not sure what the Internet is but perhaps were afraid to ask, let's backtrack a bit. Simply put, the Internet is networks of computers connected to each other. If you have a personal computer in California and you're connected to the Internet, You can exchange data with other computers connected to the Internet in California, in New York, in Germany, or in Hong Kong, sort of like what's shown in the sketch below. The work leading to the Internet started in the late 60s with government-initiated and funded connections between various big research computers. The idea was to provide a means of communication that could survive a nuclear explosion that might take down the country's ordinary telephone infrastructure. Then other computers started joining in. The Internet kept growing and multiplying as people developed more university networks, corporate networks, and government networks, and connected them to all the other previously linked networks. They were motivated by the premise that the more computers are connected to each other, the more useful it is to be connected. I like to think of the interlinked networks of all the computers on the Internet as forming a connection co-op. An important element in establishing this connection co-op was defining a set of connection rules, so that any network that followed these rules could readily plug into the existing network. I imagine that the evolution of railroad networks in the last century must have followed a similar course. The myriad railroad companies needed to agree on common track gauges. Once they did that, every loop and spur could be connected to the rail networks that spanned the entire United States, and a boxcar could go from California to Kansas, crossing sections of track owned by different companies without a hitch. Similarly, today, a pile of data can originate in California, travel over a number of lines, cross the boundaries of many different networks and arrive at its destination, say, a computer in Kansas. In other words, the Internet provides a universal gauge for computer data. The growth of the setup of interconnected computer networks has been underway for decades. At first, the network served as the means for government and university researchers to communicate with one another. It grew at a moderate pace. Later, the Internet intersected another phenomenon, the mushrooming of personal computers connected to local area networks, LANs. LANs were a phenomenon unrelated to the Internet. They were a consequence of the proliferation of PCs in corporations and other institutions. At first, PCs were used for individual tasks alone. Increasingly, however, they were connected to each other, first so that they could share an expensive printer, later so that they could exchange data, files, and mail. Once large numbers of personal computers at each organization were interconnected through their own local area network, people got the idea that their LAN could be connected to the Internet. When that happened, that corporation's network became part of the connection co-op. At this time, two phenomena, the growth of the original Internet and the growth of networked PCs, converged, and with the inclusion of corporate LANs, the Internet's growth accelerated enormously. Not only did the growth rate accelerate, but the nature of participants in the Internet also changed. They originally consisted of university researchers sending their studies, papers, and data to each other. But as millions of networked personal computers joined the connection co-op, the Internet became the means for every PC user to become connected to every other PC user. How could such a complex network keep up with such unbridled growth? It could precisely because of the fact that it is a connection co-op. As each corporation strengthens its own network, it contributes to the strength of the overall network. As in any good co-op, people acting in their own self-interest act in the interests of the whole. Then there is also a major boost to the carrying capacity from the way the Internet operates. When it was first created, the idea was to provide many alternate routes by which to send data over long-distance telephone lines, so that if one route was blocked or didn't work, the system automatically found another one. This is done by large strings of data being broken down into smaller chunks, or packets, which are more easily absorbed into the stream of bits already flowing by. This approach expands the capacity of a network without additional investment. As a rough analogy, consider sending a group of passengers on a trip at the last minute. While it may be impossible for a large group to find a block of airline seats, individual passengers can generally get on board because there are usually a few random, empty places. The airline may even be willing to sell those tickets at a lower price because it doesn't want to fly with empty seats. On the Internet, The packets of data are like passengers sitting in the otherwise empty seats of long-distance telephone networks. They fill the gaps between packets from other users. This method of transmission makes extremely efficient use of the existing telephone networks. Two additional phenomena further accelerated the growth of the Internet. The first was the fact that personal computers were being improved and upgraded to become multimedia PCs, meaning that they were able to deal with colorful images, photos, sound and even video. The second was that a researcher at CERN, a European nuclear research organization, named Tim Berners-Lee developed a means of linking the data on one computer to the data on any other computer in a way that made it extremely simple for a computer user to perform such a feat. When you clicked on a highlighted keyword, such as the name of a company, the connection would automatically be made throughout the entire Internet network, and the computer that contained information about that company would be opened up for your examination. The portion of the Internet that combines colorful graphics with Berners-Lee's search method is the World Wide Web. To a computer user, the fact that any PC on any person's desk could become a window into millions of computers all over the world was like a miracle. And the fact that the material in those computers could be enhanced with colorful graphics, photographic images, and even rudimentary sound and video made it a very seductive miracle. To sum up, this miracle owed its existence to the confluence of four forces: the ongoing evolution of interconnected networks, the presence of large numbers of personal computers on local area networks that could be connected to the bigger network via a universal gauge, the spread of multimedia to personal computers, and the Berners-Lee search method. Just as a mixture of chemicals consisting of just the right ingredients can undergo spontaneous combustion, this confluence brought about an explosion of public interest in the Internet. But is that explosion a flash in the pan, or does it signal the start of a more lasting change? It so happens that as I was writing this book, Intel semi-annual strategic gathering was coming up. My role at these occasions is to describe our business environment as I see it, and to call attention to significant changes. I felt that the Internet was the biggest change in our environment over the last year. But that feeling was not enough. I needed to deal with the question, could it be a 10x force for Intel? If it is, what must we do? Bits and stolen eyeballs. After thinking about it quite a while, I felt that the phenomenon of connecting all the computers in the world has such a wide reach that it would affect a number of industries. Because it is a communications technology, the Internet is, of course, likely to impact the telecommunications industry. Could it have a 10x impact? Consider the cost of sending a certain amount of information over the telephone lines. The technology by which data packets are sent through the Internet uses the existing infrastructure so much more efficiently that it is rapidly delivering connection services that can be substantially less expensive than ordinary telephone connections. In other words, the data traffic on the Internet represents a more cost-effective, commodity-like method of connection than a traditional telephone call. But beyond this, it has further efficiencies as people translate an increasing portion of information previously sent by conventional telephony into data. It is a little bit like the way sending a fax compares to reading a document over the telephone. It is more cost-efficient because you can send a lot more information in a shorter period of time. All this suggests the potential to decrease telephone companies' revenues. But the Internet traffic also represents an extra business opportunity for telephone companies. It can be an opportunity to utilize the monumental investments they have made in building their connectivity infrastructure. This puts the long-distance carriers into a dilemma: do they embrace the Internet or do they hide from it? In other words, the Internet has pluses and minuses for the telecommunications industry. In the near term, growth of the use of the Internet may appear to be more of a threat. But in the long term, data rich in pictures, voice, and video promise an even larger use of the Internet and therefore new business opportunities. If we put together a balance sheet of the impact of the Internet on the telecommunications industry, it would look something like the following table. Pros and cons of the Internet for the telecommunications industry: positives, negatives. Additional data communications business. Conventional telephony can be replaced by data communications. It takes less traffic, utilizes investment made in infrastructure. Telecommunications could be commoditized. Pictures, voice, and video mean lots of data, more traffic. The internet has potentially just as much impact on the software industry. It can provide a much more efficient way to distribute software. Think about it. Everything that flows on the internet is a bunch of bits. And software is a bunch of bits. Software is distributed today by the manufacturers to people like you and me by putting those bits on a floppy disk or a CD-ROM, enclosing the disk or CD in a colorful cardboard box and stashing it on the shelf of retail stores much as if it were detergent or cereal. However, the bits that make up a word processor or a computer game could just as readily be shipped by the manufacturer to your and my computers through the cost-effective method of the internet. After all, if bits can flow freely from one computer to another, then someone can take pieces of software, even sizable pieces of software, and move them from one computer to another, or from one computer to a million others. No cardboard box and no shelf space are necessary. And no middleman. The whole sales process would clearly be more effective, not to mention how much easier it would be to upgrade or modify the software. Look at this phenomenon from the standpoint of retailers, who have made a large business out of stocking and selling bits wrapped in those eye-catching boxes. Won't the internet have the same impact on these stores as the arrival of a Walmart store would on a small-town retailer? This surely feels like a 10x force. Another phenomenon affecting the software business is that the internet provides a brand new foundation on which software can be designed. This foundation doesn't care about the specific nature of any of the computers connected to the internet. It works with all kinds of computers. If software, maybe lots of software, can be generated for this new target, won't that siphon off business from Intel and from those computer manufacturers and software developers who have built their businesses around our products? Could it have a 10x impact on them and on us? But again, this is not all. All the media companies are getting caught up in this swirl too. In the past several years, practically every media organization, the Viacoms, the Time Warners, has founded a new media division for experimentation, much of which is now focused on the World Wide Web. Startup companies are springing up on both coasts of the United States to service those companies who want to create their own website and to measure how many people look at their information as such. Even advertisers are joining in. This could be an even bigger deal than what is happening to the telecommunications and the personal computing industries. By some estimates, worldwide spending on advertising is some $345 billion. Right now, all of this money is spent on advertising in newspapers, magazines, radio, and television. The money flows from advertisers like GM, Coca-Cola, and Nike through the conventional media industry without any of it ending up in the pockets of the personal computing or telecommunications industries. That may be about to change. If I sketch a before and after map of the industry, it might look like the figures on the next page. What this map suggests is that the internet, or, to be precise, the World Wide Web, is another way for advertisers, the GMs, the Coca-Colas, the Nikes, to reach their consumers with their messages. To do that on a big scale, you have to steal the eyeballs, so to say, of the consumer audience from where they get those messages today, i.e., newspapers, magazines, radio, and television, to displays on the World Wide Web. If this happens to any great extent, it would obviously be a big deal for both the old industries, the newspapers, magazines, radio, and television networks, who would lose some of the funds, and also for the new industries, the connection providers, the people involved in generating the World Wide Web, the people who make the computers, who would gain some of those funds. What would be a boon to the latter would clearly be a loss to the former. The media industry before the internet, the media industry after the internet. But for this to happen in any big way, lots of eyeballs would have to be lured away from the traditional media. The information on the internet would need to be made as appealing as the programming on traditional media today. There's a lot of experimentation going on to make computer screens come alive, technology to make objects appear to be three-dimensional, to allow the viewer to move among them as if he were navigating in a room, to enrich the content with good quality audio and video. All of these improvements could be brought to bear to jazz up the information found on the World Wide Web, so that it would match or even exceed the richness we are already accustomed to on the television screen. And the probability that PC production rates are likely to surpass combined black and white and color television production rates in the next year or two lends support to the plausibility that PCs connected by the Internet could, in fact, become a significant alternative to televisions. Given the size of the media industry, the rewards to the new players would be enormous. Of course, so would be the loss to the traditional media industry unless, that is, the market expands, reaches more people and therefore benefits all players. We may be witnessing the birth of a new media industry. If that is so, it surely represents a 10x change. What about us? As I began to prepare my assessment of Intel's business environment for the upcoming meeting, I had lots of things to consider. Clearly, if interconnected computers represented the basis for a new media industry, that could have an enormous positive impact on our business. Much as improved personal productivity in offices drove the growth of our industry in the 80s, sharing data among working individuals continues to propel this growth in the 90s. Becoming a medium for the delivery of commercial messages could continue this growth into the next decade. For this to happen, content has to come to life, objects need to become three-dimensional and sound and video need to become ubiquitous. Processing the large number of bits that make these up requires higher and higher power microprocessors. This has wonderful promise for our business. But, and there is always a but, if software developed for the Internet will run on anybody's microprocessors, that would open our business to competition by a number of players who today are not really players because their chips don't run the software that personal computer users predominantly use. Our product could be commoditized. And that's not the only threat on the horizon. A few industry figures have been going around touting the emergence of inexpensive Internet appliances. These simplified computers would rely on other larger centralized computers someplace on the Internet to store their data and to do much of their number crunching, and would just transmit to the computer users whatever software and data they needed, whenever they needed it. The argument goes that, this way, users would not have to know as much about computing as they do now because all of their tasks would be performed behind the scenes by the network of larger computers. Such an Internet appliance could be built around a simpler and less expensive microchip. Clearly, this would be detrimental to our business. But there are a number of questions associated with this proposition. The most important is such a computing device even technically feasible? It probably is, but it probably wouldn't do much. Fundamentally, you can't fool Mother Nature in computing, either. Inexpensive microprocessors are usually slow. A simple and cheap microprocessor would not do a wonderful job of creating content that is appealing enough to steal eyeballs. Surely one could make the sort of television sets that prevailed and functioned quite effectively 25 years ago for a lot less money than today's TVs cost. But consumers don't want yesterday's capabilities in TVs or in computers. And consumers may want lower prices but not at the risk of going back technically. And there is an even more important issue involved. In 1995, some 60 million PCs were bought by consumers. What motivated these purchases? I think most of them were bought for two types of use. First, use that involves the individual user's own data and own applications, and second, use that involves sending and sharing data to and with others, either within a corporate network or through the telephone system. The Internet fosters the emergence of a third class of use, applications and data that are stored at some other computer someplace, prepared and owned by unrelated individuals or organizations, that anyone can access through this pervasive, inexpensive set of connections, the connection co-op. While this last category is amazing even as it is today, and probably has great promise going into the future, can it really effectively replace the first two classes of use? I don't think so. I think a triad of categories of applications will prevail indefinitely. The beauty and allure of personal computers is the very flexibility with which they can deal with all three categories. A computing device that is useful for only one of these categories would not be attractive in comparison with a computing device that can deal with all three. As I continued to work up my presentation, I realized it was time to draw up another balance sheet and take stock of all of these applications. I show this balance sheet on the next page. Threat or promise? Before we ask what this balance sheet adds up to, let's ask a more basic question. Is the internet that big a deal? Or is it an overhyped fad? I think it is that big a deal. I think anything that can affect industries whose total revenue base is many hundreds of billions of dollars is a big deal. Pros and cons of the internet for Intel: positives, negatives. More applications. Microprocessors could be commoditized. Cheaper connectivity. More intelligence resides on centralized computer. Cheaper software distribution. Internet appliance might make do with a cheap microprocessor. Media business opens up, needs powerful microprocessors. Does it represent a strategic inflection point for Intel? Does it change any of the forces affecting our business, including our complementars, by a 10x factor? As I look at the above balance sheet, I don't see that either our customers or our suppliers would be affected in a major way. What about our competition? Let's apply the silver bullet test. Does the internet bring on the scene players that would be more attractive targets for our silver bullet than the targets we have now? My gut says no. There will be new players on the scene to be sure, but they are just as likely to play the role of complementers as competitors. I certainly wouldn't want to use a silver bullet to take out a complementer that might bring new capabilities to us. Does my list of fellow travelers change? It does, because companies that use it to be complementers to our competitors are now generating software that works as well on computers based on our microchips as on computers based on others. That makes them our complementers too. Also, new companies are being created almost daily to take advantage of the opportunity provided by the internet. Creative energy and funds are pouring in, much of which is going to bring new applications for our chips. So my fellow travelers are likely to grow in number, whereas I don't see that we are about to lose any. What about our people? Will they be out of it and not get it? I don't think that's very likely. A lot of our people have followed the evolution of the internet from research to mass market, both in their capacities as researchers and in their capacities as users of the mass market version. Their presence ensures that we have the genetic mixture that represents this technology in our midst. Let's test for dissonance. Are we doing things that are different from what we are saying? We are busily involved in communicating Intel messages on the World Wide Web ourselves. We have ongoing contact with most of the key players in this emerging branch of our business. We even talk with the people who are advocating the development of the inexpensive internet appliance without an Intel chip in it. I don't see signs of strategic dissonance. But then again, as the CEO, I could very well be the last one to notice. All this suggests that the internet is not a strategic inflection point for Intel. But while the classic signs suggest it isn't, the totality of all the changes is so overwhelming that deep down I think it is. What do we do? On balance, I think the promises of the internet outweigh the threats. Still, we won't harness the opportunity by simply letting things happen to us. Because this "we" specifically includes me, I have to ask, what do I do differently? I decide to devote more than half of my environmental assessment to the internet. While that's an easy thing to decide, to fill my presentation with things I'm not embarrassed to say to my colleagues is harder. In other words, I have to study. I read everything I can lay my hands on. I spend many hours searching out computers located on the World Wide Web and looking at their contents, reading the content of both competitors and oddball presences. I visit other companies, including those that at first blush might be regarded as the enemy because they are devoted to diminishing our business by putting an internet appliance on the market as a substitute for PCs. I ask our own people to show me things we can do with PCs attached to the internet. Gradually, my picture gets clearer. I put my presentation together and finally give it to 40 or so of our senior management team, some of whom know a whole lot more about my subject than I do and some of whom haven't given any of it much thought. Comments on my presentation range from "this was the best strategic analysis you've ever done" to "why the hell did you waste so much time on the internet?" But I succeed with one thing: the center of gravity of our management discussion shifts measurably. There seems to be a measure of embarrassment surrounding things to do with the internet. People know a lot less than they let on. Being familiar with the internet has become a cultural mandate that causes people to be embarrassed to ask basic questions, so my sense is that a lot of the familiarity that exists is extremely superficial. We set up a hands-on course for our senior managers and for our sales force, where they get to experience the current status of the World Wide Web firsthand. The hope is that this course will fill in the background bit by bit without confronting people with their ignorance point blank. I have to admit that my own knowledge is too superficial for my taste as well. But as my knowledge deepens, my conviction is growing that the triad of software coming from personal sources, from telephone and network sources, and from the internet will together be what will drive our industry in the years ahead. My conviction is also growing that the media and the advertising industries represent a growing opportunity for us. We have a few problems in exploiting all this. We need to update our own genetic makeup, to be more in tune with the new environment. We have a whole slew of new fellow travelers that we need to get to know, to cultivate, and learn to work with: software companies that we never had anything to do with in the past, telecommunications providers that are in the process of upgrading their networks, advertising and media companies that want to learn about our technology, and advertisers who have paid no attention to the computing world until now but suddenly realize that they had better start. Do we have the time, the attention, and the discipline to play this more complex role? We may need to rethink our entire corporate organization structure and modify it to let us play this role with fewer internal complexities. Such a change would touch the lives of thousands of our employees. They would need to understand why we would tinker with what has worked well for us in the past. Intel operates by following the direction set by 3 high-level corporate strategic objectives. The first has to do with our microprocessor business, the second with our communications business, the third with our operations and the execution of our plans. We add a fourth objective, encapsulating all the things that are necessary to mobilize our efforts in connection with the internet. This is preceded by a lot of argument. Some think we might just as well fold all the internet-related things we need to do under the other 3 objectives. I feel otherwise. Packaging internet activities separately and elevating them on a par with our other 3 objectives is a way to communicate their significance to the entire company. So that's where we are. Except for one last thing. What if the people who believe in the cheap internet appliance turn out to be right? It is likely that the internet appliance is a case of turning the clock backward, given that the trend over the last 20 to 30 years has consisted of pulling down intelligence from big computers to little ones. I don't believe that the internet is about to reverse this trend. But then again, my genes were formed by those same 20 or 30 years. And I'm likely to be the last one to know. So I think there is one more step for Intel to take to prepare ourselves for the future. And I think we should take it now while our market momentum is stronger than ever. I think we should put together a group to build the best inexpensive internet appliance that can be built, around an Intel microchip. Let this group try to derail our strategies themselves. Let them be our own Cassandras. Let them be the first to tell us whether this can be done and whether what I now think is noise is, in fact, a strong signal that, once again, something has changed. Career inflection points. Career inflection points caused by a change in the environment do not distinguish between the qualities of the people that they dislodge by their force. In 1998, I relinquished my position as Intel CEO after 11 years in the job. I did this as part of a normal succession process. I have always regarded preparing for succession to be part of a manager's job and have often stated that belief. Now I could do no less than what I expected others to do. For a number of years, there had been a growing consensus among members of Intel's board of directors about my probable successor. We had often discussed this choice and consequently, over the years, moved the person whom we were considering into positions of increasing responsibility. My change of status was widely expected, both inside and outside the company. I continue to hold the job of chairman, go to work every day and participate in many of the same activities as before. Still, I knew that there would be a difference, and that the difference would grow in time. As career changes go, this was a mild one, as mild as they come. But it still made me think about the millions of career changes that occur each year around us. Some of them are as natural as mine, but many more occur in adverse circumstances. Consider this, according to some statistics, 1998 will have seen $1 trillion worth of merger and acquisition activities. That trillion-dollar figure signifies changes in corporate structure employing perhaps 1 million people. There are other forces at work today that further alter the work environment. The internet tidal wave that I described in Chapter 9 has grown and accelerated, increasingly affecting the way a large number of companies do business. It destroys existing business methods and creates new ones. Many jobs get shaken up in the process. The year 1998 saw the momentum of the Asian economies go from fast forward to reverse. Those countries fueled economic growth all over the world with their appetite for new products and services. The repercussion of the changes brought about by the Asian economy's sudden stalling out has affected an untold number of careers in Asia and the rest of the world. Clearly, if environmental changes beget strategic inflection points for companies, they do so even more for the careers of the employees of those companies. Nor are environmental changes the only ones that precipitate upheavals in individual careers. The desire for a different lifestyle, or the fatigue that sets in after many years of doing a stressful job, can cause people to reevaluate their needs and wants, and can build to a force as powerful as any that comes from the external environment. Put another way, your internal thinking and feeling machinery is as much a part of your environment as an employee as your external situation. Major changes in either can affect your work life. Are there any lessons from how corporations handle cataclysmic change that can be applied to individual careers? Your career is your business. I have long held that each person, whether he is an employee or self-employed, is like an individual business. Your career is literally your business, and you are its CEO. Just like the CEO of a large corporation, you must respond to market forces, head off competitors, take advantage of complementers and be alert to the possibility that what you are doing can be done in a different way. It is your responsibility to protect your career from harm and to position yourself to benefit from changes in the operating environment. As environmental conditions change, as they inevitably will, the trajectory of this business of one undergoes a familiar curve, reaching a defining point where the action of the CEO, i.e., you, determines whether your career path bounces upward or accelerates into a decline. In other words, you face a career inflection point. Just as a strategic inflection point marks a crisis point for a business, a career inflection point results from a subtle but profound shift in the operating environment, where the future of your career will be determined by the actions you take in response. While those actions will not necessarily introduce an immediate discontinuity into your career, their impact will unleash forces that, in time, will have a lasting and significant effect. As we have seen, a strategic inflection point reflects a wrenching moment in the life of a company, but the effort of navigating through it is spread around among members of a community. Career inflection points are even more intense for an individual because everything rests on his or her shoulders. Career inflection points are commonplace. A story comes to mind. It so happens that it was related to me by a business journalist who had interviewed me when this book was first published. This man used to be a banker. He was happily and productively employed until one day he went to work and learned that his employer had been acquired by another, larger bank. In short order, he was out of a job. He decided to change careers and become a stockbroker. He knew that he would have to pay his dues. While he was comfortable with financial matters, he knew that a banker's skills are not the same as those required of a stockbroker. So he went to stockbroker school and eventually started working as a full-fledged broker. For a while, things went well and the future looked promising. However, A short time before we met, online brokerage firms started to appear. Several of this man's clients left him, preferring to do their business with low-cost online firms. The handwriting was on the wall. This time, our man decided to make his move early. He had always had an interest in, and aptitude for, writing. Building on the financial knowledge that he had first acquired as a banker, and that was reinforced during his stint as a stockbroker, he found himself a job as a business journalist, a less lucrative position but one less likely to be replaced by technology. At the time we met, his career was in ascendancy. The transition this time was not as traumatic, mainly because he initiated it in his own time, unlike the previous time, when the change was initiated for him by outside circumstances. A lot of the elements involved in dealing with strategic inflection points are at play here, too. The most important and the most difficult is to be alert to changes in your environment. When you work inside an organization, you're often sheltered from a lot of things going on in the world at large that are relevant to the health of the business you work for. When you got this job, even though deep down you knew it was unlikely to be what you would do for the rest of your work life, you may very well have tacitly relinquished responsibility for your welfare to your employer. But by taking your eyes off the environment in which your company operates, like the CEO of a large organization, you too may be the last to know of potential changes that could have an impact on your career. How do you get around that? The mental fire drill. Tune your alarm system to be more alert to potential strategic inflection points in businesses like yours. Go through a mental fire drill in anticipation of the time when you may have a real fire on your hands. Simply put, be a little paranoid about your career. Put yourself in the shoes of the CEO of a large company. You must open up your mind to outside views and stimuli. Read the newspapers. Attend industry conferences. Network with your colleagues in other companies. You may hear anecdotal descriptions of changes that may be relevant to you before they add up to a cogent trend. Listen to chatter from colleagues and friends. In a corporation, the helpful Cassandras would be the frontline employees who sense potential changes first and bring early tidings of strategic inflection points to the CEO. In the case of a career inflection point, the Cassandras are likely to be concerned friends or family members who work in a different industry or competitive environment and deduce winds of change that you don't sense yet. Perhaps they have already been bounced around by a wave of change that's coming your way. Or perhaps they've experienced a career inflection point in their own industry and have a lesson to impart, even if they're not in your line of work. When different sources, newspaper stories, industry scuttlebutt, and company gossip and your Cassandras all reinforce each other, it is really time to sit up and take notice. Put yourself in the picture. Ask yourself a series of questions. Do these anecdotes indicate changes that might somehow apply to you? How would an important change manifest itself in your situation? Would you know about such changes from the kind of business information that you routinely get from your company? Would you be able to predict that changes like this are coming your way from your company's financial performance? Can you bring up your concerns with your boss? What would you do if you were affected by such a change? How likely is your company to be affected by changes in your industry? Would those industry changes be a temporary setback for your company or a harbinger of a longer-term industry restructuring? The distinction is important because your company can bounce back from the former with no effect on your career. The latter, however, will likely have a lasting impact on it. Consider how developments originating in other industries might have a ripple effect on your job. When a new machine or a new computer system comes in, can it change the way your department does its work? Are your skills as good in doing things with this new technique as they were before? Are you confident of learning the new ways? If not, what should you do? Maybe your company is losing ground to a competitor. What does that imply? Could you be in the right line of work but working for the wrong employer? Or is the entire industry shifting ground? Asking and answering such questions are important because the measures you take to fix things vary with the circumstances. If your employer is losing out to another outfit, you could continue to utilize your skills and just look for a way to jump from the sinking ship to one more likely to navigate the competitive seas successfully. On the other hand, when there's a fundamental change in the industry and you don't change your skills, you will lose at both winning companies and losing companies. That is a situation that can truly be classified as a career inflection point. The existence of career inflection points is best analyzed by conducting a vigorous debate with sympathetic associates. You need to cultivate the habit of constantly questioning your work situation. By examining the tacit assumptions underlying your daily work, you will hone your ability to recognize and analyze change. In other words, get into the habit of conducting an internal debate about your work environment with yourself. Timing is everything. As with strategic inflection points of the business kind, success in navigating a career inflection point depends on a sense of timing. Are you picking up on the portents that something may be changing? Have you already anticipated a change and prepared for it? Or are you waiting until the signs are incontrovertibly clear before you make your move? The stages of dealing with a career inflection point, if anything, are even more emotion-laden than with inflection points affecting a company. Little wonder, after all, you are likely to have invested a lot in getting your career to where it is. More important, you've invested your hopes in the further upward trajectory of your career. As signs appear that the curvature is shifting downward, your whole being will work at trying to deny that this is so. Often you'll be tempted to believe that because of your particular individual excellence, you'll be exempt from the change. You'll think, it may happen to others but not to me. This is a dangerous conceit. It's the equivalent of the inertia of success that dogs companies which have done well. Career inflection points caused by a change in the environment do not distinguish between the qualities of the people that they dislodge by their force. History offers plenty of examples. In early 19th century England, the increasing use of mechanized looms made woven cloth much more cheaply than by traditional manual means that an entire class of craftsmen, both expert and mediocre weavers, lost their independent livelihoods and were forced to work as unskilled laborers in the mills. The rise of the automobile threw harness makers, both good and bad, out of work. Today, small farmers are struggling to retain their economic viability against competition from agricultural conglomerates. No one is immune to these environmental changes, no matter how skilled and how invulnerable he or she may feel. Denial can come from two wholly different sources. If you've been very successful in your career, the inertia of success may keep you from recognizing danger. If you've just been hanging on, fear of change and fear of giving up whatever you have achieved may contribute to your reluctance to recognize the situation. Either way, denial will cost you time and cause you to miss the optimal moment for action at or near the inflection point. As in managing businesses, it is rare that people make career calls early. Most of the time, as you look back, you will wish you had made the change earlier. In reality, a change made under the benign bubble of an existing job, when things are still going well, will be far less wrenching than the same change made once your career has started its decline. Furthermore, if you are among the first to take advantage of a career inflection point, you are likely to find the best pick of the opportunities in your new activity. Simply put, the early bird gets the worm, latecomers will get only the leftovers. Get in shape for change. The time period from an early sense of foreboding to a career inflection point is valuable. Just as athletes get in shape for competition, this is your time to get in shape for change. Picture yourself in different roles. Read about these roles. Talk to people who are in them. Ask yourself questions about them. Conduct a dialogue with yourself about how you suit those roles. Train your brain in preparation for the big change. Experimentation is a key way to prepare for change. The banker/stockbroker started on his transition to business journalism while he was still employed as a stockbroker. This served several purposes. He dusted off his writing skills, tested the feasibility and practicality of his future change and established contact with potential sources of business before giving up on his main source of income. In doing so, he verified that he could plausibly make a living by writing if he devoted himself to it full time. Experimentation can take different forms. It can be moonlighting on a second job, as in this case. It can be going back to school part-time. Or it can be by asking your current employer for a new and entirely different assignment. All are ways to explore new directions for your career and get you ready for a career inflection point. As you experiment, avoid random motion. Don't just take blind steps in directions whose only common characteristic is that they are different from what you are presently doing. Guide yourself by your knowledge and understanding of the nature of the changes that are upon you. In this way, the experimentation propels you forward in a direction that gets you out of the way of those changes. Look for something that allows you to use your knowledge or skills in a position that's more immune to the wave of changes you have spotted. Better yet, look for a job that takes advantage of the changes in the first place. Go with the flow rather than fight it. It is very important to visualize what you want to achieve before you start to traverse the career equivalent of the valley of death. Ask yourself another set of questions. What do you think the nature of your industry is going to be in 2 or 3 years? Is this an industry you want to be a part of? Is your employer in a good position to succeed in this industry? What skills do you need to progress in your career in this new landscape? Do you have a role model of the person who has the career today that you want to achieve? Remember the incident I described in Chapter 8, when our then chairman, Gordon Moore, made a comment to the effect that if we were to change from a semiconductor company to a microprocessor company, half of our management would have to become software types. That observation captured the essence of a strategic change in the workings of the company that, in turn, precipitated career inflection points for quite a few people, including myself. But it also gave us an idea of, if not a role model for, what we would have to learn and how we would have to change. Much as conducting a dialogue with yourself will help clarify the existence of a career inflection point, an ongoing dialogue about the nature of the future you are headed into will help focus your efforts and allow you to move forward in a number of small, consistent steps rather than in a cataclysmic leap forced on you by the external world. There are 2 things that will help you get through the career valley: clarity and conviction. Clarity refers to a tangible and precise view of where you're heading with your career, knowing what you'd like your career to be as well as knowing what you'd like your career not to be. Conviction refers to your determination to get across this career valley and emerge on the other side in a position that meets the criteria you have determined. When a corporation crosses the valley of death involved in navigating a strategic inflection point, the CEO is called upon to describe a clear vision of the new industry map and provide the leadership to get the organization across this valley. As CEO of your own career, you will have to supply both the vision and commitment yourself. Both are daunting. Arriving at the clarity of direction through a dialogue with yourself and maintaining your conviction when you wake up in the middle of the night filled with doubts are both tough. Yet you have no choice. Inaction will leave you in a position where the action will be forced upon you. As a single individual, you have just one career. Your best chance to succeed in a career inflection point is to take control of it with full focus and energy, and with no wavering. You have to steel yourself to recognize that it will take a while before you rebuild your career support system, experience, and confidence to the same level that you had before. Part of the support system you will miss is the identity, a brand your employer gave you. Whether you join another company or go out on your own, you have to let go of one identity and build a new one. This takes effort and time, and most certainly will test your courage. But it will also give you a sense of independence and self-confidence, which will help you in dealing with the inevitable next career inflection point. A new world going through a career inflection point is not an easy process. It is not without many dangers. It calls upon all your best resources. It calls upon your understanding of the new world that you wish to become part of, your determination to take control of your career, your ability to adapt your skills to that new world, and your resolve as you deal with the fear and anxiety of change. It's a bit like emigrating to a new country. You pack up and leave an environment you're familiar with, where you know the language, the culture, the people, and where you've been able to predict how things, both good and bad, happen. You move to a new land with new habits, a new language and a new set of dangers and uncertainties. At times like this, looking back may be tempting, but it's terribly counterproductive. Don't bemoan the way things were. They will never be that way again. Pour your energy, every bit of it, into adapting to your new world, into learning the skills you need to prosper in it and into shaping it around you. Whereas the old land presented limited opportunity or none at all, the new land enables you to have a future whose rewards are